sort of a very wild ride for me. I was very emotional. My emotions were all over the place. But I, like many others going through this stage of my life, had a vision in place, or a goal, a plan of how I hoped my birth experience would go. And I was realistic with myself. I know, of course, that birth is a quite unpredictable time, a quite unpredictable process. And I knew that this plan that I had was more of sort of a hope, a best case scenario version, and that it likely would not go exactly as I was wishing for it to. And I tried to be realistic about that and sort of plan for any hiccups that might come up along the way and to sort of deal with them as we went. And I reminded myself of this quite often and tried to make sure I had those backup plans in place, knowing that in a perfect world it would go exactly as I hoped, but things usually don't go exactly to plan, especially during birth. But when it came time for my daughter to be born, it just sort of felt in the moment like every possible hiccup that could happen was happening, sort of one after another. And her journey to joining us on Earth was sort of so far off course from what I had been planning in those 9-10 months leading up to the moment. And it felt overwhelming at the time. And I know that many other new parents have a sort of similar experience when things go wrong and similar emotions surrounding that journey. And it often feels very hard and wrong to express those negative emotions around the process of birth and the welcoming of a child into the world. I feel like people often want to remind you in the moment that, your baby is here and they're happy and they're healthy, and that's the only thing that matters. And of course, I know that those things matter, and I am and was incredibly grateful that she was healthy and that she was happy and that she was with us. But I also was experiencing a lot of grief over what I felt like I had lost or missed out on in the way that she was welcomed into the world. And I feel like those two emotions are not mutually exclusive, even though the people around us often want to make us feel like they are, or want to make us feel like we're doing something wrong if we are experiencing anything other than that joy and gratitude in that moment. And we're often forced to act like those feelings don't exist, like we're not feeling them, and sort of push them down and ignore them and try to focus on those positives. And that's not really sustainable or realistic at all, because those feelings are just as valid as the joy and the gratitude and the sense of warmth that we have welcoming our child. Those feelings of grief are just as real, and they have just as much of a right to be acknowledged and sat with and experienced as the more positive emotions around that experience do. And we're often not allowed to feel those things, and I just feel like that is doing such a disservice to new parents, to try to force them to only focus on the good and to act like their experience in the birth, especially as the person giving birth, like their experience has no merit and doesn't matter because they were so lucky to be given this healthy, happy baby. And it does matter. Of course it matters. We're just as much of a human now as we were before we gave birth. Our feelings are just as valid. And it's okay to experience both of those emotions in the moment and even years later, to still grieve that journey that you feel like you missed out on. And I remember laying in bed after my daughter was born. We stayed a couple of nights in the hospital. And I remember laying there and hearing other women on the maternity floor going through labor and hearing sort of their cries and their pain, and feeling jealous, which might sound strange to feel jealous of someone in pain, but it was a jealousy over that experience that they were going through, that experience that they got to have, that I had envisioned for myself and I had planned for and I felt prepared for. And the sadness that I felt over not even getting to try. I think that's what was the hardest for me, is that I felt very prepared. I was scared of motherhood. I was scared of a newborn baby, but I never really felt scared of the birth process. I felt ready for that. And the fact that I didn't even get to try was really crushing, really heartbreaking for me. And so hearing these other women experiencing it, I just remember that moment so clearly even now, like over 5 years later, just laying there and hearing it and being like, it's just not fair that I didn't even get to try. And that is what was the hardest for me, I think, was having that experience just completely denied. And I didn't think it would be still so emotional talking about it this long after the fact, but that grief is still there. Even all these years later, it's still there, and thinking back on it is still hard. And I was, of course, happy and overjoyed to meet my daughter, but I was also crushed at what I had missed out on. And I think it's fair to give ourselves space to feel both of those things and to not feel guilt over the negative emotions that we feel at that time. And I think so many people are forced to keep those feelings at bay and not discuss them and push them down and act like all they felt was that joy. And I don't think that's fair to anyone. And I think it's important for us to let new parents know that grief is normal. If you had something like that taken away from you, if your experience wasn't what you thought it would be, that grief is normal. Even if you're feeling that joy at the same time, it's okay to also feel sadness and loss over something that you missed out on. And it's okay to talk to people about that. And I think more people need to. They need to acknowledge that that's real and it's valid and it's important to be able to sit with it and to share it with others that you feel safe doing so with.